Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Ancient Jesus Future Faith, a podcast focused on building the future of our faith by digging deep into the words, context, and time of Jesus. Each week, we strive to answer the question, what does the Bible actually say? And what does that mean for our lives today? I'm your host, Tana Sheaver, and I'm joined by my co-hosts / panelists / experts / theologians / amazing people, Don Sheaver.
Hello.
And Sarah Minardi.
Hi.
So we're going to do a little bit of introductory stuff in this episode. Talk about why we're doing this podcast, a little bit about ourselves. And to kick us off with that, Don, this is a podcast that you were very interested in doing and sort of an outgrowth of your previous podcast, Evangelibros. Yep. So I think it'd be great if you could start us off by telling us why you were interested in doing this podcast.
Sure. So first of all, Evangelibros kind of comes out of this mindset of redeeming evangelicalism. Even the name Evangelibro was meant to be humorous because we've all experienced someone that maybe fits that persona. And I'll let you define that however you want. So, but what I feel like what it has evolved into, or what's necessary now, is that a lot of people, I don't even know that they're looking to any longer redeem their connectedness or even redeem the name evangelical. There's lots of books out now, conversations happening about post-evangelicalism. In a lot of ways, I would say that I, as a pastor and as a person of faith, have really been post-evangelical for quite some time. Mm-hmm. It's just that I had so much of my roots in evangelicalism that it was maybe either hard to acknowledge or recognize that the time had passed. So in reflection and having conversations with the two of you and several other people, it just became clear to me that we need something more. And one of the things I'm hoping that with this podcast we'll be able to do is demonstrate that some of the things that make us disconnected from evangelicalism will create a deeper connectedness of faith. Some of the things that evangelicalism has insisted that if you disagree with them on, means that you don't take serious something such as the Bible. If you have a disagreement around Scripture in any way, a lot of times then the response back is, well, you just don't care about the text type thing. What I'm hoping to do is that with you guys and with some of the things we're hoping to build out beyond just a podcast for this, is to really establish a space in which people can come and find the beauty of their faith in a world that no longer values evangelicalism post 2016 election, post January 6th, post a lot of things that unfortunately made evangelicalism a political party as opposed to an expression of faith. And there's many other things beyond just those two things. But ultimately, I think that's where it really came to a head.
That's very interesting, and that
thank God. Otherwise, the first podcast
that was a really
doomed.
Boring answer, Don. Let's hope Sarah can do better.
Well, we all know we've been banking on that from the beginning.
That really resonates with me. Sarah, does what Don said, does that resonate with you, or do you have other reasons that that made you interested in coming along to help build Ancient Jesus Future Faith?
I would say yes. It does resonate with me. My faith has grown and changed over the years, and I think that is an amazing and beautiful thing to grow and walk out a faith journey. And with the title Ancient Jesus Future Faith, it really makes me think about Scripture and how we approach Scripture. So the ancient Jesus aspect reminds me of the value of approaching Scripture in its historical context, hence the ancient Jesus. Like, what was it like in the time that Jesus walked on the earth? What was the culture like? What were the norms that we may not are not normal for us.
Sure.
Not normal for me. I used to read the text. I used to come to the text as with all of my lenses from my experiences, from my personality, from what people had told me, clouding what's actually written in Scripture. And often we do use the word text in our little circle. And I love that because I think using the word text instead of using the word Scripture has a little bit of a nuance, because it reminds me that we're studying the words that are written, the text. We're studying what's written in the text first, not what we've been taught, not reading the commentary first, not even the oral traditions or the midrash. It's looking at the text first and doing our best to honor the text by placing it into its historical, cultural context, considering what the author was trying to tell us when they were writing this. And so that's the part of Ancient Jesus that the title that I get really excited about. I've always been excited about the text. I have a very fond memory of being a child, growing up in the Catholic Church. I was really interested in faith, going to Mass every Sunday, saying all the responses, singing really loud. But we weren't really encouraged to read the Bible on our own. But we did have a Bible in the house. And I remember, I don't know how old I was, probably 7, 8, or 9, reaching up to the top shelf and getting that tiny little Bible with the tiny print and just starting to read it. And I love that image because as a mom, I often, and my husband does this even better than I do, but I have 2 girls, and we really try to pay attention to where their interests come out in their day-to-day living. Because I think as a child, you can get some of that truest expression of the self that God made you to be before a lot of things start clouding that up. Mm-hmm. So I like remembering back to when I was a child and reaching for that Bible and starting to read it with the tiny print. And I'm sure I didn't get very far because Genesis gets a little intimidating, especially if you're that age.
Gets ugly pretty quick.
But yeah, so just always having a value for faith and interest in faith. I was also the Catholic girl who came home from church and played Mass, even though I knew that you had to be male to be a priest. But I would be
Says them.
But my shirt, Jesus empowered women. But I would take my little First Communion book and redo the whole Mass with my pretend audience or my dolls or things like that and sing all the songs. So, yeah.
I did that too.
Did you?
I used saltine crackers for the communion
Yeah.
wafers with my Barbies and my...
Yeah.
Man, I wanted nothing to do with church when it was over.
And the funny thing is, out of the 3 of us, you're the pastor.
No, the funny thing is, out of the 3 of us, our society has shaped me
That's-
into being the most likely
that is-
to go after
is
feeling
true.
like I could stand in front of a group of people and tell them what to think.
That is true. That is
Yeah.
true.
So Ancient Jesus, future faith, carrying all this into the future. Like, how do we build a faith that honors the Scriptures, that honors God, that applies to our day-to-day life? How do we take what we learn from the Scriptures and what we know of God and apply it to the choices that we make every day, the interactions that we have? There's so much beauty in the text that can help inform us and inspire us and challenge us to, in essence, love each other well.
I love that. And I really like the distinction you made between text and scripture, because it's what it sounded like you were saying to me is that, it's almost like scripture isn't just, what was written. And even though there's, we say, oh, all scripture is God breathed, it's what it means to us is it's more, there's all these connotations that come with it, all these things that are overlaid on top of it, all these interpretations from the years and what we've been taught it means. And I like the idea, but the text is, we're going to study the thing,
Yeah.
and not what other people have told us is the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that distinction. And I think that for me is the one bedrock of why I'm interested in helping to build this, because understanding that distinction, even though I didn't have the words for it at the time, is what really helped helped me build, I think, a better faith over time. It was sort of releasing what I was told things meant and exploring that for myself. So, I've been married to Don for years, and
These microphones are really nice. So.
yeah. and so I was alongside him for his journey in kind of breaking that mold, and learned over time, here's how you can study the original language and what did those words mean, and then here's the context, here's what it was like in Jesus's time. And so when he said this, the people of that time heard this, and like that was just that, to me, that is just so much more invigorating than this sort of list of rules and expectations that in evangelicalism has kind of become. And I want to help other people experience that.
Yeah. Actually, Tana, if you don't mind, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on something. And I know how much you adore being put on the spot.
Oh, I love it.
So just so you know, if you're watching this, anytime you see Tana take a sip of water when I'm about to ask her something, that's like a nervous reflex. She's preparing herself for the question. But the question is...
This is vodka.
It's vodka. And we're recording this on Saturday morning. So Tana, my question to you is, with having a background in literature, English lit particularly, but then also rhetoric and everything, how important is authorial intent? And I know that there's a debate in the industry, so to speak, on whether or not authorial intent matters. But let me preface it a little bit, or kind of couch it in some way. I think when we're talking about just a pure piece of art, authorial intent doesn't necessarily matter a bunch. It's also how the viewer, the person reading it, how they receive it has a great amount of significance, right? But I think the moment we talk about scripture...
You're stepping on my answer, man.
Okay. Well then,
like, you're asking the question and then you're answering how how I would answer.
I am a middle-aged white man. I will be quiet now.
So this is what made me a bad English major. But I think a good rhetoric scholar. So I got my master's in English literature and just, I was a bad English lit major. But then I got a PhD in rhetoric and writing, as you two know.
Nobody that has a PhD was ever a bad anything in school. Just so you know.
Okay, fair. But so in English literature circles, a lot of people are like, well, the authorial intent doesn't matter. What was written doesn't matter. What matters is what the readers bring to it, right? And that bothered me a lot, because I was just like, if I write something, there's something I mean by it. Like there's a meaning behind it that was created by me. And you will listen. No. And so that was just such a difficult concept for me, especially since it didn't seem to bear out, because for me anyway, because I remember specifically on my poetry exam, I had to, analyze a poem and discuss what I thought the meaning was. And they were basically like, that was the one really, really bad part of my portfolio. They were like, you barely passed because we don't think this is a good interpretation. And I was like, wait, I thought you said authorial intent doesn't matter. And all interpretations are viable. And so it was just kind of funny. Anyway, that's my constant ongoing war with poetry. But
we'll tag all your professors in this.
Yeah, I'll get a call. So, but then when it comes to where you use the principles of rhetoric in a more like maybe an argument or something like that, obviously authorial intent matters, or speaker intent, because there's more, I think, at stake there. So what you were saying, Don, with like a piece of art, you're like, well, it doesn't kind of really matter what an artist is is doing there. It's how people receive it. And I would say most artists probably actually believe that to a certain
Yeah,
extent.
I do want to be careful though, because I'm not saying it doesn't matter what the artist felt.
Yeah.
It's just that it isn't pertinent to the meaning of the painting when it comes to other people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, so when that comes then to scripture or the text, obviously authorial intent is of the most importance. And it's interesting to me because I think a lot of people over the years have infused their political ideologies, their sensibilities from their time, their desire to stay in power, kings, James, like all of that into interpretations of scripture. And it's always so strange to me because those infusions into scripture are what a lot of evangelical Christianity was built on, leading up into recent time. But when we attempt to kind of strip away those things and go, what it was the authorial, the author's intent, we're accused of infusing something into scripture that's not there.
Yeah.
When really what we're trying to do is chip away.
Certainly. I mean, it does kind of backfire. And, these are the types of things that we'll get into even in greater depth when we have conversations around specific passages in the text, or we get into, interpretation and methods of interpretation and everything. So I just really appreciate you. I know you don't like being put on the spot, but thank you for doing so.
Just put my doctor hat on.
Yes. I only have a bicycle hat, so.
Anyway, yeah, I actually I appreciate that question because I think it's very important. It gets at what Sarah was talking about with scripture versus the text. So just to kind of add to what we're talking about here and what we're interested in accomplishing with this podcast, the interesting thing to me is that what we're really bucking against a lot with this podcast is the label evangelicalism, which in a lot of ways we're saying is a label that is dying, like that we need to find the next thing after evangelicalism. And we had a conversation the other day that I want to kind of bring back up again, if it's all right with you too, about those labels that we have applied to us or apply to ourselves. And Sarah, you had a really interesting contribution along that line about kind of labels that you carry, and then what the kind of what those would imply to other people.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So this actually comes out of a conversation Don and I had like maybe a couple of months ago in discipleship, and just realizing, I hate labels, and I actually hate identifying myself by certain things because I just feel like no label ever fits. And, but we were just laughing because I was trying to explain my thoughts on this to Don. And I said, Don, if you're not watching the video, I'm a white, Christian, homeschooling mom, grew up in suburban Midwest. And if you knew those labels and that's all you knew of me, you might have a very particular picture of who I am and what I believe. And I see it because when I run in different circles, even the conversation will assume things.
Yes.
Right.
I'll be in a certain circle and somebody will make a comment, and it's just like as if it's a given that of course you're going to be on the same page as me on this topic.
Right.
And I'm like, not really. Surprise. So yeah, just the idea of did you really think that when you turned on this podcast, were you really excited to hear from a white middle-aged pastor a pastor's
I
wife
I
and
was totally excited about it.
a Christian homeschooling mom.
Yes, run. And hopefully you all didn't just end the podcast right there.
And stop.
Yeah, I think that just even if you take one of those things, particularly within association to Christian, and that's homeschooling, right? And that label in and of itself just carries so much extra. I don't want to say baggage because I don't think it should necessarily be baggage, but it just carries so much extra because there's assumptions that immediately an individual will make about the reason you've chosen that route. And maybe not even just why you chose the route, because I think people can kind of wrap their brain around that, but maybe the opposite of it, why you picked against like a public school or a public gathering, and there's a lot of assumptive activities there. So Sarah, for you, because I know that this whole thing, and even in your why at the beginning, you brought up, ancient Jesus. So you and I have had conversations, Tana, all three of us have had lots of conversations around how there's even labels in the text. Mm-hmm. So did you want to at all share some of that piece and how that kind of infiltrates even in our reading of something that's relatively, we think, simple, but as soon as we hear it's coming from a white suburbanite homeschool Midwestern woman, we automatically have assumptions about what you're trying to communicate. And I think the same thing is true in the text when we have these individuals speaking. So anyhow, I'd just like to hear more from you on that.
I was hoping that you were going to cover that part.
Oh, you were? Well, I'd be happy to. Of course, first of all, Sarah knows that what we're referring to is the Pharisees, right?
Right.
And there's another group, too, that's really important, and that is, if you ever look, and I think the NIV does it, in Luke 15, you'll see it where it says, and Jesus ate with the sinners, and sinners will be in quotes. Mm. And I would argue these are scare quotes, not just, quotes. They're scare quotes because sinner had a connotation in its day that doesn't exist today. Or I shouldn't say it doesn't exist, it's just that we mask it differently. So a sinner in first century Israel, Second Temple Judaism, would have been someone like a tanner or a tax collector or a prostitute. I think today, prostitute might be the thing that many people within Christendom and other religions, or just more conservative about their perspective on sexuality, etc., would view as they're a sinner because of what they do for a living, right? But that's really, at the end of the day, what sinner meant in ancient times was someone who their day-to-day life in some way disrupted what Torah had called upon them to live and to function. And not necessarily always just sin as in not doing what you're supposed to, but also purity laws would be broken because, like a tanner, if you don't know anything about tanning, especially in ancient processes, I'm not going to go into it on this podcast, but you can Google it and you'll be upset you did, because of what they use to tan the hides. All of this leads to a group of people being called sinners and lumped together. In our imagination, we would never look at a group of people who work for the IRS, people who do taxidermy, and or make blankets and stuff out of leather, the leather work, and then prostitutes, and go. We those are all lumped together. Like we went.
Right,
I
yeah.
don't think we would categorize that group together.
Yeah.
But in ancient Judaism, they were categorized together. The other big one is Pharisee. So for most of you listening, watching, you probably had a similar experience to myself, and I believe Tana and Sarah, you both had a similar experience, that the word Pharisee or the name Pharisee immediately implied a bad guy on the scene.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
In fact, we've heard from the pulpit, don't be a Pharisee,
Right.
or you Pharisees, or Pharisaic, whatever. I'm going to break the news to our listeners pretty early in this podcast, but it is most likely that Jesus identified himself as a Pharisee.
I felt like that.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I felt like I needed to add
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Thanks.
the proper reaction.
You actually startled me. I'm glad I wasn't drinking anything. So it's important though, because Paul, when he's standing before the Sanhedrin, which is the council that is made up of Sadducees and Pharisees, when Paul's standing in front of this group, he says to them, I am a Pharisee. And this is post his Damascus Road experience. So Paul does not feel like a Pharisee, or the label Pharisee is something that he needed to discard in order to recognize and believe Jesus to be Messiah. And because of that, it's really important. So Paul says, I'm a Pharisee. I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. Basically, my dad was a Pharisee. My grandpa was a Pharisee. I grew up in a lineage and a household of Pharisees. And Jesus, the way Jesus approached Scripture, approached people, approached the law, all of those things are very Pharisaic. That Jesus embraced Torah, the wisdom literature, the prophets, whereas a Sadducee, for instance, would have only embraced Torah. Okay, so much about what Jesus does is declares him to be a Pharisee, and this is really important and goes a long way in kind of showing early in our discussions how important it is to understand ancient Jesus, because when we use Pharisee as a derogatory term from the pulpit, we are categorizing people in an anti-Jewish way at best and an anti-Semitic way at worst. And that's really significant because today's Judaism, modern Judaism, and I want to be very clear here and make this, and I'll probably make this caveat quite often, I know way more about ancient Judaism than I know about modern Judaism. I've read lots of modern rabbis, but for the most part, I stick with ancient Jewish concepts. But modern Judaism is a direct evolution of Phariseeism. So the Pharisees are who survived, carried on studying the Torah, and moved it outside of the temple in Jerusalem when this temple was destroyed, and carried on the study of the scriptures. That later became the rabbinic movement. And the rabbinic movement is what has led us to modern day Judaism. So I hope that we kind of realize that when you think about Pharisee as a negative, you are saying something unintentionally, but you are saying something against the Jewish community around you when you view it negatively, because that is their heritage. That is their story. That is the line of their faith, is Pharisee into rabbinic tradition to modern Judaism.
I think it was interesting when you were saying that Paul didn't feel the need to discard that label. And it just felt it just resonated with me, because I don't feel like I want to discard the label of Christian.
Yeah.
But it's becoming an extremely loaded label.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even label of homeschooling mom.
Right.
Right? Like that you can be proud of. And that is the complication I think we all face right now, is that in this setting that we're in, you don't know what, in fact, Tana, you and I were just talking about this yesterday. Like, what do we redeem and what do we abandon?
Right. Yeah.
And that's such a complicated piece for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are people who have reclaimed labels, but then there are people who are like, I reject that label. I'm going to accept something else. And sometimes you have labels thrust upon you. I was reading David Gushie's book After Evangelicalism the other day, and he was quoting another person, D.G. Hart, who said, "It is curious that the evangelical movement in the United States is so oppressive that it can claim even those who do not want to belong to it," which I thought was really interesting, because one of the things that Gushie discusses is that there's all these sort of different denominations that sort of ended up folding into evangelicalism and sort of losing what made their denomination unique or whatever, and just kind of getting glommed up into this evangelical monster that, no one could really define that well anyway. And so it's interesting because, for example, I'm sorry, I keep referring to your labels, Sarah, but you saying, well, I'm a Christian homeschool mom. Well, immediately I think people would apply that label evangelical to you then.
Absolutely.
Whether or not you wanted it.
Absolutely.
And so that becomes problematic. And then for me, if I'm very careful about how I introduce myself, because if I say, oh, well, I'm a pastor's wife, boom, evangelical slapped across my forehead.
Just so you know, I have never heard you introduce yourself as a pastor's wife.
That is because I will not.
And that's part of what was so funny in the original conversation is that I don't think of you as a pastor's wife, but technically you are.
Right. And that, and then those labels also carry expectations. When in earlier days at a different church, because I was the pastor's wife, then it was like expected that I do certain things and behave certain ways, And I think that's another reason why we resist labels, right? Because it's like, oh, well, if you label me this way, then you're expecting X, Y, Z out of me, and you're not going to get it. So, yeah. Don, do you have any labels that you worry about, branding you a certain way?
I mean, yeah, a lot of mine are a little bit more obvious in the sense of like, just look at me and you have labels.
But for our listeners.
No, I wasn't even saying that. I'm just saying that middle-aged white male and the labels that get placed upon that, rightfully so. And this is the other part that's important. Some labels are necessary in order to prevent causing danger to someone. And again, part of our mistakes that we make is that we're not an introspective enough group of people to determine well if our labels that we use are stereotypes, bigoted, prejudicial, and harmful, or if they are genuinely good label to keep yourself safe in a situation. So it's kind of interesting, this topic, because really I'm of two minds in a lot of ways around middle-aged white male. One, I know all the things that come with it, of what people are going to anticipate out of me. First of all, as a quick side note on that, which makes it easier to live into it too. Sure. Right? If I know people are going to give me the mic, literally in this case, and I can just talk, I'm going to. And assume it's because I have something brilliant to say, not because I am confused about whether or not I actually have anything of value to say. But I think that there's importance because I have lots of people in my life that are people of color who those labels about middle-aged white male are healthy boundaries in certain situations to not find themselves in a place in which they could be harmed, whether emotionally, physically, spiritually, whatever it might be. So I think that those labels have value for the world, and they're also really hard for me to swallow. And one of my other labels, and this is definitely for those watching, not listening, is I've often been pegged as a hipster. I'm almost 50. I'm too old and lazy to be a hipster. And so what happened is I was not cool, and somehow my look of wearing bicycle hats, glasses, and having a long goatee somehow became a good label.
So you're the people who hipsters copy.
Oh, God. I have no interest
Does that make you the original hipster? the only.
Okay, we can stop. Tana, what labels do you have?
I already discussed my labels. No, but what you were saying about how sometimes, the labels prevent, people from being harmed.
Sure.
I did not word that well, but anyway, that makes me think then again about the label evangelical. do either of you think that that label it carries with it inherent harm?
Sarah, you passed the Pharisee thing on to me. It's all yours.
I don't know. I don't think I can speak to this one.
Yeah?
Yeah, evangelical, I've never felt applied to me. I think because of coming out of Catholicism, which was pretty much when I was an adult, like in my 20s. And I never quite understood what evangelicalism even enveloped. As you mentioned, that in the book that you were reading, that it kind of became this thing that is hard to define. So every time I hear the word, I kind of wonder, I'm like, well, what denominations are wrapped up in this? What is this implying? So I don't know if I can answer if I think that there's inherent harm in the term.
Don, do you have a thought on that?
Well, first of all, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to pull something up, hopefully.
He just keeps passing the buck.
Look, here's the problem. I'm a middle-aged white man, so I could just take over and everyone expect that. I don't want to do that.
Sure.
I want to hand it back to you because I do want to I'm going to pull something from David Gushie's book.
Oh, okay.
That I think is helpful, but I just didn't have it up at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. I just think that there are some inherent assumptions in what an evangelical is now that I don't think were always true, or maybe they were only true of maybe certain evangelicals, and it sort of all got kind of fuzzy along the way. But, I think because of our current political climate, there is a lot of heavy implication in the term evangelical, because what was it, like 82% of evangelicals voted for Trump in the 2016 election, and there's an interesting turn in a lot of churches where I think there was like a Trump Bible. And there's just a level of...
I may have thrown up a little in my mouth there.
And Trump was autographing Bibles, which just feels inherently disgusting to me. And there is this weird worship level with him that I don't feel like has happened with other political leaders. I think there has been maybe like a hero worship, of other political leaders of like, oh man, this person's so great. But it feels like this, recent turn in evangelicalism brought it to more of like this is a God ordained second coming of Christ kind of thing, which is dangerous. And so for me now, it almost feels like the label evangelical has been tainted by the political angle of it, and would be very difficult to unravel.
Right. Well, and this goes to so many pieces, right? That it's not about what denomination you're a part of or what. It's about what are the influences that have impacted your understanding of faith. Mm-hmm. I think is the argument about whether or not you would be an evangelical. So
sure.
Let me read you this list. First of all, I think it's humorous in what I relate to in it, but I think it's also kind of gives us a sense. So Sarah, maybe you can take the test with us live and just put a hashtag every time you would say, okay, yes, I know what that is, or I'm familiar with it. Maybe not deeply familiar, okay? All right. Lord, I lift your name on high. So if that phrase, that quote, or has familiarity to you,
you might be an evangelical.
You might be an evangelical, and it's just going to keep building. All right. Bob Jones, John Piper, yep. Biblical inerrancy, complementarianism, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, 700 Club, John MacArthur, The Message, Eugene Peterson, Wheaton College, Purity Rings, Azusa Pacific, reparative therapy, moody, left behind, Veggie Tales, Hell Houses, Zondervan, Tim LaHaye, God Didn't Make Adam and Steve,
Oh boy.
Tony Evans, Christian Zionism, The Rapture, Father Hold Me. So this is kind of like the checklist that that Gushy kind of puts out, that if you have like 20 of these checked, around 20 of these checked, then you probably are.
I had 23.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the only one I didn't have was the very last one, which is Father Hold Me. I have no clue what that is. And maybe because I have dad issues, I blocked it out. I don't know. So yeah. So you had 23. Did you keep track?
I didn't keep track, but all of those terms and phrases, when I came to Protestantism, it was the things I was trying to catch up on, because people would toss those things around and I didn't know what they were talking about.
The Beginner's Guide to Evangelicalism.
Yeah.
So hear that, David Gushy? You nailed it.
Yeah, for me, that was it was like revisiting my young adult days, because I converted, I guess, from Catholicism when I was like 16. And so all of that was like stuff I grew up with, or,
Right.
I think I read every single one except for the last Left Behind book.
And real quick, I want to say to our listeners and watchers, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment how many of those you got, rewind it, go back through it. And I'd love to hear what our listeners, if they also did well. It's almost shocking how much that lands. So
Yeah.
one.
I know we're almost out of time, but that list was really helpful. But I just wanted to say, especially to our listeners, that maybe that list tugged on some of your heartstrings, possibly. Maybe there's nostalgia and feelings around some of those things, and maybe it hit you in a different way than it hits us. And I just want to say that wherever you are in your faith journey, you are welcome here as listeners, as interacting the best way that you can. I think for the three of us, I think I can speak for the three of us to say that community and hearing everyone's voice is extremely important to us, which is why
Absolutely.
a podcast is some kind of a funny venue for us, a limiting venue, because usually we want to engage more with whoever is listening, but we're hoping to open opportunities for you to be able to speak back into that. But wherever you are in your faith, I encourage you to hang with us, come back, keep listening, and you're welcome here, whether you agree or disagree or you just don't know. This is a safe place to ask questions, a safe place to be, a safe place to interact with around faith and a God that loves us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, and I'm really grateful you said that, Sarah. I think one of the things that is really important to me is that we're not trying to say we have figured it out, or that we genuinely know what's next, or that we have something to say about the future of Christendom. But rather, we've all experienced things we felt dissatisfied with where things are currently. And we've been lucky enough to find a group of people around us to figure it out as best we can together. And we just want to share that. We want to invite as many people that want to come along and figure it out with us. So if you're a 5 checkmark person, you're a 25 checkmark person, or you're a 25 checkmark person, but 10 of those things in that checkmark still deeply resonate with you, kind of like what you were saying, Sarah, and they're still very important to you. There's room. There's room on this bus. There's room in this discussion. And yeah, thank you for saying that, Sarah.
I think that's a very, both of you made very important points. And yes, thank you, Sarah, for taking us down this thought process here. That it is what we are trying to do is chip away the things that have been added to Jesus that aren't supposed to be there. not
Or aren't supposed to be authoritarian.
right. Yeah. Not get rid of Jesus, not destroy the Bible, not, it's not like, well, this didn't work, so let's obliterate it and start fresh. It's trying to figure out what is redeemable, and what is good, and carry forward with what is good, and maybe let go of the things that are oppressive or harmful. And I think that's a very important distinction. So it doesn't just seem like, well, we're done. That's it. Evangelicalism is over and there's nothing good about it. So let's just bury it and move on. So I think what's really going to be great is that we're going to continue to have those conversations of playing with those things and figuring out what is good and beautiful, and what can we build upon that will create a beautiful and wonderful, accepting and loving and strong and courageous faith, and let go of the things that harm. I think that is the kind of exploration that we're looking for here, and we hope people will, join us in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any final words, Sarah or Don?
I don't think so.
No?
That's great.
If you're still here, we're really excited to have you here.
If you're still here.
And we hope you join us on this journey and you continue to listen. And we really do want this to be, as Sarah said, it's kind of shocking that we would pick a podcast to do this, because we appreciate discourse and conversation so much. So we would love for our listeners and our viewers to really take us up on that. Reach out to us in the different social media platforms that we have, and don't hesitate. And one of us will get back to you. We will respond.
Yeah, look for us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Our website should be up by then.
And Twitch.
And Twitch. See, we're adding new things every day. So just look for us, drop us a line. And plus we'll have new podcast episodes every week on anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and YouTube. And that's it. So that's all for today. We thank you, Sarah and Don, for all of your amazing thoughts. And please join us next time. And in the meantime, find us on those platforms. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.